My sister rewrote my grandmother's will and took all the property for herself, so I went to court and took everything from her. My name is Elwood Marin. I'm 35 now, and if you told me a decade ago that I would one day need to defend my integrity in a courtroom because of my younger sister, I wouldn't have believed it. Back then, we were just two kids from Windale, Tennessee, raised under the same roof with old-fashioned values and a closeness I once thought was unbreakable. Her name is Clarabelle. She's 3 years younger than me, bright as a polished penny, and sharp in ways that charmed just about everyone who met her. We weren't just siblings, we were co-conspirators in childhood mischief, partners in whispered jokes during family dinners, and each other's last line of defense during hard years. If you'd seen us growing up, you'd have said we were close-knit. But something happened. It wasn't abrupt like a car crash or a slammed door, it was a slow parting, like two boats drifting in different currents. It began after our grandmother, Lorna, passed. She was the last pillar of our family who made sure everyone showed up for birthdays, for holidays, for Sunday dinners that smelled like cornbread and old stories. When I got the call about Grandma Lorna, I was living out west. Work had taken me to Colorado, public sector, nothing glamorous, but solid. I booked a red-eye flight and made it back to Windale the next day. The funeral was held in her church, the same one she'd sung in for 50 years. The pews were filled, the hymns slow and familiar. But everything felt off. It wasn't the grief, that I understood. It was the stares. The quiet nods. The way people avoided speaking to me for longer than a polite moment. Clarabelle didn't say much either, just nodded when I approached and stood with our parents at the front like a statue. No one brought up Grandma's will. I didn't either. I assumed, foolishly, that we'd talk when the time was right. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from a law office in Windale. Inside was a copy of the final will, sent as a courtesy, the kind that isn't meant to surprise but merely inform. My hands went cold before I even opened it. There was something sterile about the envelope. No note. No call. Just cold, creased paper. Grandma's estate wasn't vast, but it meant something. Her home on Oak Ridge Avenue, her modest savings, and most importantly, her keepsakes. Things like the family Bible with worn corners, the brooch she wore to every Christmas service, the wooden jewelry box that played a tinny waltz when opened. Every bit of it was left to Clarabelle. There was no mention of me. Not in the personal items, not in the estate, not even in the final paragraph where many wills offer blessings or words of closure. It was like I hadn't existed to her. Like we hadn't spent all those Saturday afternoons talking over the phone, her voice gentle and familiar as she asked about my life, my work, my stubborn lawn that wouldn't stay green. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. Or maybe she had forgotten. She was in her late 80s. Maybe her memory had faltered. But then I did what I wish I hadn't, I asked to see the previous version of the will. The one drawn up 5 years before she passed. It took time and some persuasion, but the estate attorney obliged. When I opened it, my name was there. Not just mentioned, central. She had split the estate between us, evenly. She had listed items by name, written notes about why she wanted me to have them. There were entire paragraphs that sounded like her, small stories about our fishing trips and her belief in fairness. Somewhere between that version and her passing, something changed. And I had a sinking suspicion that it wasn't her heart, it was someone else's hand. I approached my parents first. I sat them down on the back porch of their home, the same one I grew up in. I tried to keep my voice calm, but my questions trembled out. Did you know about the change? Did Grandma really mean to cut me out? They didn't flinch. My father looked at me like I'd said something childish. It was her decision, he said plainly. You were already out in Colorado. You have a career. Clarabelle's the one who stayed nearby. It just made sense. My mother said less, but her eyes had something harder in them. You're making it about money, Elwood, she said, as if that explained everything. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise. A blessing? It wasn't the inheritance that left me gutted, it was the revelation that the 3 people I had trusted most had known all along. Known, and said nothing. They let me walk into that funeral home, hug distant cousins, sit silently through eulogies, and return home thinking I was still part of this family story. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't send angry messages or write long, wounded emails. I just unplugged. I blocked Clarabelle first. Then I blocked my parents. Then I packed the few keepsakes I still had, an old photo of Grandma and me from when I was 6, a thank you card she sent me in 2009, a crumpled grocery receipt from the last time we shopped together, and I placed them in a digital folder on my computer titled, Still Mine. I moved forward. Not out of strength, but because staying still was too painful. 3 years passed. I built a new life in Colorado. Bought a modest place near the edge of town, with a fenced-in yard and a workshop that kept my hands busy when the silence grew too long. I had friends, decent neighbors, and a job that made sense most days. I didn't speak of Windale, and no one ever asked. The only thread still connecting me to that past was Beatrix, my cousin on our mother's side. Beatrix had always been kind in the quiet way that meant something. She never pressed, never asked me to forgive or forget. We talked once every couple of months, always catching up like no time had passed. She knew the wound I carried, and she never picked at it. Then, in the middle of January, an envelope arrived at my office. Cream-colored. No return address. No markings aside from my name, handwritten in careful, looping script. Inside was an invitation, fancy paper stock, gold-embossed text. But it didn't say who was getting married. It only listed a date, a time, and the address of a vineyard back in Windale. No RSVP. No names. No bride or groom. I stared at it for longer than I should have. The logical part of me said it was junk, a mistake. But my gut knew better. I called Beatrix. There was a pause before she answered. You got it too, didn't you? My chest tightened. You knew about it? She sighed, and her voice dropped to a whisper, even though I knew she was alone. I did. I've known for a while. Elwood, you should come. Not because you owe anyone anything. But because I think you need to see it. With your own eyes. Whose wedding is it? I asked, though I already knew. She didn't answer. Just said, you'll want to be there. Trust me. So I went. I booked a room at a small roadside inn near the vineyard. Told no one at work. Left no trace on social media. I arrived the evening before and drove past the venue in the dark, just to be sure it was real. The next day, I wore a simple black suit. Crisp shirt. No tie. Nothing loud. I parked at the edge of the gravel lot and watched guests trickle in, some familiar faces, some strangers. I waited until the music started before stepping through the front doors. The air inside was strange. Not celebratory, tense, like people were holding their breath. Heads turned as soon as I walked in. A few people froze. One man, an uncle I hadn't spoken to in years, shifted uncomfortably and looked away. Others whispered. The silence spread like a wave. I saw Clarabelle across the room. She stood near a floral archway, her gown pristine white, her veil already lifted. My parents were beside her. My father's expression hardened. My mother's eyes widened in what looked like practiced shock. None of them approached. I stayed near the back, close to the exit. Then, the officiant cleared his throat. If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or. The lights dimmed. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. A hush fell across the room. Even the music stopped. Then it began. A slideshow. At first, it was just childhood photos, Clarabelle and I in old Halloween costumes, birthday parties from the 90s, beach trips with Grandma Lorna smiling in the background. Then came the captions. He never deserved her trust. Some betrayals wear a family's skin. Photos transitioned into what looked like text conversations. My name was on them. The words were cruel, transactional. One message read, it was easy to take what she'd never notice was missing. The crowd murmured. Someone gasped. An older woman covered her mouth. I stood frozen, staring. They're fake, I said aloud, but the projector didn't stop. More slides. He smiled at the funeral, knowing he'd already won. You can lie in court, but not in front of blood. Clarabelle stood at the altar, bouquet in hand, eyes locked on me. She raised her hand and pointed, just like an accuser in an old courtroom drama. He's the reason none of you know the truth, she said. Her voice didn't waver. She had practiced this. He has something to confess. No one moved. No one laughed. It wasn't theater, it was a trial. I took a step forward, but before I could speak, Beatrix stood. Her voice, steady, sharp, cut through the tension like glass. "No," she said, "he doesn't. But I do." She walked to the front, past the stunned officiant, and placed a stack of papers on a nearby table. "These are both versions of Grandma Lorna's will. The first, where she left her estate equally to Elwood and Clarabelle. And the second, altered, signed weeks before her passing, after she fell and was placed on medication." The room shifted. Guests leaned forward. Some stood. "I've known for years," Beatrix continued. "But I didn't have proof until recently. Clarabelle manipulated our grandmother. She visited her alone. Pressured her. Changed her mind while she was vulnerable." Clarabelle's face turned to stone. Her arm fell to her side. "Every slide you just saw was constructed using a message emulator. The fonts don't match. The timestamps are inconsistent. And worst of all, they never happened." I looked around. The groom had stepped back, uncertainty on his face. A bridesmaid sat down in the crowd. One uncle took off his glasses and stared at the floor. Silence. Clarabelle didn't speak. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, hands trembling. I didn't wait. I walked out the side door. The sun was beginning to set. I stood in the gravel lot, the air crisp, heart pounding. 5 minutes later, Beatrix joined me. "I didn't know she'd go that far," she said. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It's not over." She glanced back at the building. "Then let's make sure the next part's in court, not under a wedding arch." The night after the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Back in the inn, I replayed every detail: Clarabelle's steady voice, the flicker of judgment in old friend's eyes, the hum of that projector cycling through lies. I couldn't make sense of how someone I once held so close had weaponized our history, turned a celebration into a trial, and cast me as the villain. But Beatrix, she didn't let it end there. The next morning, she met me at a coffee shop off Route 31 with a folder under her arm. Her eyes were tired but resolved. "I found a digital forensics expert," she said. "He's worked on civil cases before. He can authenticate the slideshow content. Do you think that's necessary?" I asked, voice hoarse from a night of silence. "Yes," she said without pause. "Because this isn't just personal anymore, Elwood. This is defamation." And it was public. Over the next week, we pulled together everything. Beatrix's affidavit detailed the timeline, her observations of Clarabelle's increased presence at Grandma Lorna's nursing home, her sudden shift in demeanor, her cryptic remarks at family dinners about setting the record straight. We contacted the wedding videographer. After some resistance, he agreed to release the unedited rehearsal footage. In it, Clarabelle could be seen directing the staff to pause at objections, to dim the lights, and to cue the reveal, her exact words. Every clip felt like a blade, calculated, rehearsed, undeniable. The forensics expert's report came back 3 days later. The slideshow texts were traced to a popular Android emulator. The font spacing was inconsistent. Metadata showed timestamps manually altered. The messages were fabrications, dressed up as truth. I sent everything to my attorney, a younger professional named Merrick Callan, referred to me by a retired colleague from Denver. We met over a secure video call. I showed him everything. Merrick was calm and precise. "This isn't a gray area," he said. "It's one of the clearest defamation campaigns I've seen in a long time, especially since it was staged so publicly. We have intent, motive, and fabricated evidence. It's time to take it to court." He drafted a formal cease and desist letter to Clarabelle, demanding that she remove all digital content related to the slideshow, refrain from posting defamatory content, and issue a written retraction. It was sent via registered mail and electronically. The response came 2 days later, not from her, but from her lawyer. It was thin. Dismissive. They denied the claims outright and framed the wedding incident as an emotional outburst, driven by grief. But then the harassment started. My phone began buzzing at odd hours with anonymous texts. "Everyone saw who you are. You stole more than memories. Confess before the court does it for you. Each message came from a different number. Some were from disposable messaging apps, others from spoofed email accounts. One even included a screenshot of the fake messages from the wedding slideshow, blurred, cropped, but unmistakable. I didn't respond. Instead, I collected everything. I stored them in encrypted folders and uploaded backups for Merrick's legal database. I changed my phone number, increased my online security, and locked down my accounts. My workplace, an infrastructure consulting firm, was informed quietly. I didn't want drama, but I needed to be ahead of any rumors. To my surprise, Human Resources was supportive. They connected me with their internal reputational risk team, who advised me on how to handle potential online smears. Clarabelle wasn't done. She started posting vague updates on social media. Some truths are too big for silence. Not everyone who cries is innocent. She didn't use my name, but the timing, tone, and imagery made the target clear. Old photos of our childhood, quotes about betrayal, captions that mirrored the wedding narrative. Friends commented with sympathy. Clarabelle replied with cryptic emojis and hashtags. Meanwhile, Merrick and I filed the lawsuit. Defamation. Emotional distress. Reputational damage. We submitted the evidence, Beatrix's affidavit, the forensic report, the unedited video footage, and printouts of the harassing messages. The court accepted the case. A hearing was scheduled. Clarabelle responded by filing a counterclaim. She alleged that my legal action was a form of emotional abuse. That she had suffered panic attacks, lost clients, and endured mental anguish from being targeted for telling her story. Merrick didn't blink. "We'll file a motion to dismiss," he said. "It's a counter-tactic, and a weak one. She's not being sued for grieving. She's being sued for staging a defamation campaign during a wedding ceremony." He filed a motion with the court, citing the fabricated nature of her claims, the absence of medical documentation, and the fact that Clarabelle had continued to post suggestive material online even after receiving our cease and desist. The judge agreed to review both sides. Meanwhile, Beatrix offered something more, a recorded call with Clarabelle. It had taken place a week after the wedding. Beatrix had kept it light, casual, pretending she wanted to understand. Clarabelle, unaware she was being recorded, and in a state that legally required only one-party consent, admitted she had tweaked the slides for emotional impact. Her words, "Sometimes the only way people listen is if you show them something dramatic." The audio was clean. Time-stamped. Clear enough to seal the intent. We submitted it as part of our discovery packet. That same week, Merrick filed for a temporary restraining order, based not just on the messages, but on a credible tip that Clarabelle was planning to leave the country, for reflection. The court granted it. Her passport was flagged. Any attempt to flee would be met with legal consequences. Clarabelle's attorney responded with another letter, this time suggesting a private settlement. They offered a written apology, a small sum for legal discomfort, and a request to dismiss the case without public record. Merrick asked what I wanted to do. I stared at the offer for a long time. Then I shook my head. No. She wanted an audience at the wedding. Let her get one in court, except this time, the story will be real. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No sweeping balconies or marble columns, just a rectangle of wood-paneled walls, worn carpet, and rows of benches that creaked under the weight of shifting nerves. But despite its plainness, it held gravity. Everything inside it carried weight. My name was called first. Elwood Marin, plaintiff. I stood and followed Merrick to our table at the front. Clarabelle entered soon after. She didn't glance at me. Her expression was unreadable, composed, but not calm. She sat next to her attorney, a tall, slow-speaking man named Trenton Lyle, whose suit looked more expensive than mine and whose folder was thinner. The judge, an older woman with silver streaks in her hair and a voice like gravel, began with a warning. This is not a family therapy session. This is a court of law. Emotions are natural, but facts are what matter. Opening statements were made. Merrick began by laying out a timeline, the inheritance, the will revisions, the public accusations made during a private event, and the fabricated digital evidence used to support false claims. Trenton countered with language soaked in sentiment. He described Clarabelle as a woman overwhelmed by grief, who had acted, in a moment of desperation, to express her emotional pain. He described the lawsuit as a second wound from the same knife. But the evidence told a clearer story. The digital forensics expert took the stand first. He explained the emulator Clarabelle had used to generate the messages. He pointed out discrepancies in metadata, formatting anomalies, and time-stamp manipulations. He even walked the court through how he had reverse-engineered the slides to prove they had never passed through a real messaging app. Next was the videographer. He testified about Clarabelle's rehearsal instructions. How she had asked for a pause before vows, the dimming of lights, the lowering of the screen. When asked if he thought it was part of a traditional ceremony, he said plainly, no. It felt like something out of a drama. But I was being paid, so I followed orders. The judge scribbled notes. Then Beatrix took the stand. She spoke slowly, without embellishment. She walked the court through Grandma Lorna's last year, the fall, the medications, the sudden, confusing changes in mood. She described how Clarabelle had insisted on visiting Grandma alone, often right before the will was altered. Trenton tried to rattle her during cross-examination, asking why she hadn't spoken up earlier. Beatrix didn't flinch. Because I didn't have proof. And because I was scared. She was my cousin. But the wedding showed me what she was capable of. Then came Clarabelle. She walked to the stand in low heels and a pale blouse. Her voice trembled slightly as she took the oath. For a moment, I felt something, faint echoes of childhood, of the sister I once trusted. But then she spoke. She talked about the day Grandma Lorna died. How it broke her. How she felt abandoned. How she believed I had manipulated things behind the scenes. I wasn't trying to hurt him, she said. I was trying to be seen. For once. Then Merrick approached. He played the audio of her call with Beatrix. The courtroom was still. I knew the texts wouldn't be enough, her voice echoed from the recorder. People need to see things in black and white. It's the only way they listen. Clarabelle's face drained of color. She didn't deny it. Merrick followed with the group chat messages we had obtained, where she'd called the slideshow her justice moment. He read one aloud. He walks through life looking clean. Let's dirty it up. My truth will be louder. The judge paused, then dismissed the jury for a recess. We reconvened after lunch for closing statements. Merrick stood beside me, calm as ever. This case isn't about grief. It's not about family wounds. It's about something done deliberately, with full understanding of the consequences. My client didn't choose to be a spectacle. He chose to respond with the only thing that can heal a shattered truth, proof. Trenton's closing remarks were shorter than expected. He circled back to trauma, to emotional fog, to pain. But by then, the courtroom was no longer swayed by sentiment. The judge requested silence. She reviewed the exhibits. The audio. The screenshots. The testimony. The harassment. After 20 minutes of review, she delivered the verdict. In favor of the plaintiff. She awarded full damages, legal costs, reputational harm, and a separate amount for emotional distress. She issued a formal order for Clarabelle to publish retractions on every platform where her claims had circulated, and to issue written apologies to each person affected by the deception, including wedding guests and colleagues. Clarabelle stood still, arms stiff at her sides. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, as if she'd finally reached the edge of something she couldn't step around. Outside, reporters waited. Beatrix placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do you want to say something?" she asked. I nodded. Just once. To the few gathered at the courthouse steps, I said. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And now, the record is clean. Then I walked away. Clarabelle's retractions began 2 days after the ruling. They were posted without fanfare, no heartfelt preambles, no candid photos, just statements drafted clearly by legal counsel. The claims I previously made were incorrect and unsupported by evidence. I retract them in full and apologize to those impacted. The message appeared across her social media profiles, on her business page, on her personal accounts, even on the event website that had hosted her wedding photos. The same text, word for word, posted with clinical precision. The apology letters were sent next. Typed, signed, mailed. I received my copy in a flat white envelope with no return address. It was dated, notarized, and included one paragraph. To Elwood Marin, I acknowledge that the content I presented at my wedding was not factual and should not have been directed at you. I regret the harm caused. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My lawyer confirmed the funds had cleared by the end of the month. Every legal expense was covered. The rest, awarded for emotional and reputational damage, sat quietly in my account. I didn't buy anything new. I didn't upgrade my life. Instead, I set up a trust to help others in similar situations, people whose stories had been twisted in the public eye by someone close to them. Word spread slowly among our extended family. A few relatives reached out, quietly and without fanfare. One uncle wrote me a letter, saying he regretted believing what he'd seen that day. A cousin called and offered to write a character reference if I ever needed one again. No one demanded forgiveness. That, at least, was a relief. Clarabelle didn't disappear, but her world grew quieter. She stopped posting. Her business lost its momentum. A sponsor she had partnered with quietly severed ties, citing breach of ethics clauses in their agreement. Her former fiancé moved out of state. Beatrix later told me he had deleted every trace of the wedding from his social media and quietly become engaged to someone new. He never spoke of Clarabelle again. Our parents never reached out, not directly. But one day, a mutual friend forwarded me a letter. It had been written by my father, sent to someone else in the family. He said they never thought it would go that far. That maybe they had looked the other way because it was easier than confronting the storm inside their own daughter. That maybe, in trying to hold the family together, they had let the truth come apart. But that letter wasn't meant for me, and I didn't treat it like it was. Beatrix and I stayed close. After everything, we were more than cousins, we were a team that had faced down the worst a family could turn against itself. We had been truthful when it would have been easier to stay silent. And that meant something. 6 months after the trial, I moved to a new place, a small town further north, where I could walk to the hardware store and see the stars at night without streetlight glare. I didn't mention it to many people. I just wanted a place where my name wasn't followed by questions or doubt. One afternoon, while unpacking a box of old belongings, I found a weathered envelope tucked between 2 books. It was one of the last handwritten notes Clarabelle ever sent me, from before the wedding. In it, she accused me of being self-absorbed, of abandoning the family, of leaving her behind when she needed someone. For a moment, I stared at it. The handwriting was so familiar it pulled at something in my chest. But then I carried it outside, placed it in a metal dish, and struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, and dissolved into nothing. Some stories don't deserve a second reading. After the fire burned out, I went back inside. I had things to do, shelves to hang, groceries to unpack, life to build. No headlines. No drama. Just quiet. People had asked me if I ever felt vindicated. If winning the case made it all better. But what I felt was simpler. I felt free. The lies had been put to rest, not with more shouting, but with facts. With evidence. With calm, measured persistence. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it leaves space, for healing, for rebuilding, for peace. And that's what I chose. The last thing I'll say is this: truth is not always enough to keep people close. But it's always enough to set them free. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.